Still struggling with French verbs? All those different tenses? See if this helps. I've tried to bring them all together into one simple overview. Watch this video. Hello and welcome to another session of Lockdown Learning with myself, Paul Holland. You are here because you're doing French for GCSE. You've probably got a fairly good idea now of all the tenses that you need for French GCSE, but perhaps you get them a bit confused. Perhaps you need a whole overview of how they seem to work together and what you need to make each one. So what I've done for you today is we're going to look at as simplified a system as possible, a way of looking across the whole of the tenses that you'll need for GCSE to get the top marks, and hopefully a way for you to visualize where each tense fits in relation to each other. So without more ado, let's dive straight into this. So this diagram is one that I've used over the years that I worked on making myself in order to try to give the simplest overview, the simplest diagrammatic visualization of French verbs, and here they all are on one sheet. The first thing you probably notice is that the present tense takes up a huge amount of space, which is something to bear in mind in French. Actually, in a lot of other languages, the present tense is not at all as complicated as it is in French. So let's home in on the present tense and look at what we've got. Just the regular ones alone take up 4 different types, if you like, 4 different families or conjugations. So when you look down the left-hand side here, you've got the ER, the RE, and the IR verbs. And that IR one also happens to have the other kind of IR that doesn't do exactly the same thing as finir and choisir. So let's have a look down the list at these regular ones, and starting with ER, seeing them in context. Here's an example I'm sure you recognize. To work is travailler. To work, not to travel, but to work. And here it comes. Je travaille, tu travailles, il travaille, nous travaillons, vous travaillez, and il travaille. And there we go, 4 of them sounding exactly the same as each other, but with all those different endings on E, ESE, ONS, EZ, ENT. And on to the RE verbs. This verb means to sell, vendre. So, je vends, tu vends, il vend. Nous vendons, vous vendez, ils vendent. And IR verbs. Here's an IR verb. Finir, to finish. Je finis, tu finis, il finit. All sounding the same. Nous finissons, vous finissez, and ils finissent. And finally, there's this odd group. There's not many to learn for GCSE. Here's an example of one of them, to go out, sortir. It doesn't do quite the same as finir. In fact, it does something quite odd. It drops the consonant at the beginning in the first 3. So sortir drops the IR and the T, the consonant in front of it, and it goes je sors, tu sors, il sort, and then it reappears again, nous sortons, vous sortez, ils sortent. A couple of things to say in overview about these verbs. First of all, where does the ER and the IR come from? Well, that's the form that you look up in the dictionary. That's the infinitive. And an infinitive means to do something, to finish, to go out, to work. And that's the form that you start with, and that's the bit that you take off in order to add these other endings on. And another massive thing to point out is that you do not pronounce that ENT at the end, okay? This word here is not travaillant, it's travail. And finissant doesn't exist, finisse. is the word finis. You stop at that point and you don't pronounce the ENT. It is silent. Good. Coming back to our diagram again, we've got some irregular verbs. If we follow this line down here, we've got these irregular verbs that happen to still follow a pattern. So let's have a look at an example or two of irregular verbs. There's absolutely loads of these, lots and lots of verbs to get your head around for GCSE. You might want to check out my video on French irregular verbs, which will be in the French playlist. But in the meantime, here's an example. Boire, to drink. And it generally follows this pattern, SST, ONSEZENT. But these two really often have a vowel change, or in the case of the one that we're looking at now, it includes a consonant change as well. Some kind of weird change for these two. So je bois, tu bois, il boit, with a T, though you don't hear that. Nous buvons, vous buvez, and then back again to boivent, and we've got a consonant turned up there as well. There's plenty of these. Vouloir, here comes vouloir. This one doesn't have SST at the beginning, it's got XXT, but that's not that different if you think about it. It's still an S sound in English almost, isn't it? So je veux, tu veux, il veut, but they're completely silent in French, so you can't tell the difference between those first three. And then nous voulons, vous voulez, and then back again to veulent, EU. So the vowel change happens in the middle there with those two, the nous and the vous forms, and there's also another consonant change. So slightly weird things happen with the irregulars. That's why they're called irregulars. Things happen, but there are definitely patterns. However, looking again at the overall chart, you'll see that there are three big ones here that are very irregular. And these three big irregulars are worth learning anyway. Here they are: avoir, être, and aller. And I'm sure as they appear, you'll recognize all the forms. J'ai, tu as, il a, nous avons, vous avez, ils ont. And être, je suis, tu es, il est, nous sommes, vous êtes, and ils sont. And aller, to go, weirdly, is with a V. Je vais, tu vas, il va. And then the nous and the vous forms, again, are different, just like they were with previous irregulars. Nous allons, vous allez. And then it changes back again to a V. Ils vont. Now, why are these three so important? Well, not only are they very, very common, and therefore you need to know them, but looking again at this chart, you'll see that they are used to help make other tenses. And here they go. With these three as their auxiliary in the middle, you can make three completely different tenses. Perhaps the most useful one for you at GCSE is the perfect tense. And here's some examples of perfect tenses. J'ai mangé, I have eaten. Nous avons visité, we have visited or we visited. And some of them use être as well as avoir. So, nous sommes venus. And ils sont montés. If you can use the perfect tense, you can make the pluperfect tense. It's using the same verbs in the middle, but in their imperfect tenses. So here's some examples. J'avais fait, I had done. Nous étions venus, we had come. Ils étaient arrivés, they had already arrived. So that's the pluperfect, that's further back in time. And you can use aller, that third irregular verb that we just looked at, that third one you can use to make the future tense. I'm going to visit, I'm going to see. I'm going to buy. Je vais acheter. I'm going to buy. It's a future tense. And finally, coming back to the main diagram, we've got one last section of other tenses which don't use those three verbs. They just have certain endings on. And you'll recognize the imperfect there. And that's the one with AIS on the end of it. So here's some examples. I was walking, you were walking. Je marchais, tu marchais, il marchait. Nous marchions, vous marchiez, il marchait. Four of them sound exactly the same as each other, typically in French. These four, no difference, but difference in spelling if you're doing your writing. And the future and the conditional, the real future, you'll recognize is formed at a basic level by taking the infinitive and putting these endings on the end. And the conditional at a basic level is the same. You take the infinitive, or the future stem as it's called, and you put these endings on, which you'll recognize from the imperfect. So a huge amount of overlap across all of these different tenses, lots and lots of areas in common, and lots of places in which knowing one thing will help you to understand something else. Knowing those regular paradigms, those patterns, will definitely make you much more familiar at looking at irregular verb endings. They almost follow the same pattern as some of the regular ones. They just have slightly different variations. Learning those three big irregular verbs, avoir, être, and aller, will help you to form those different tenses that you can use them for as their auxiliaries in that middle position. Good. I hope that was helpful for you. I hope that gives you much more of an overview of your French verbs. If it was useful, please subscribe. Thank you very much. And hopefully you'll find something else useful in some of my other playlists. In the meantime, thank you very much, and I'll see you in another lockdown learning session. Goodbye.